This week in Shari Talmud, we discussed Daf Daled Amud Beis in Kiddushin. The Gemara over there said, Tana Maisi Le Mahacha. Our Tana, for our Mishnah, learns the source that a woman can be married from Kiddushin, like it brought on the first page of the Masechta. The Tanya, Ki yikach ish asher ba'alav haya im lo timsach chen be'einav ki mitzah bo. It says in the pasuk Ki yikach ish, when a man takes a woman and he lives with her. The continuation of the brisa goes ve'ein ki ka'ela b'kesev, and taking by definition, since this is what a man takes a woman, we know that taking means kesev. He can acquire with kesev. Where do we know that from? We know from Stephron that it said when atati kesev hasoda kach menu, the field that Avram Avinu bought. He says he took it. It was taken. How with kesef? So clearly you see, that's the drasha to teach us that you man can acquire a woman with kesef. The Gemara continues and says, wait a second. What do we have a verse for? Why do we have a verse if we can learn it from a kal v'chomer? It's dinhu. The rule is like this. Wherever we can learn something logically from one pasuk, we don't need to bring a second verse to explain it, because we can learn it from the other verse through logic. What's the logic here? It's a kal v'chomer, all the more so. And what's the kal v'chomer the Gemara brings? Ma ama ivriya. What by a slave girl? She'enu niknas b'biyah. You cannot acquire her by living with her, but she is acquired through kesef. So surely a isha that we know that if you can acquire her by living with her, surely should be able to acquire her with kesef. It's a koshikain, it's all the more so. So that's a difficulty. If we have a kal v'chomer, what do we need a pasuk for? The Gemara comes along and answers and says, no, Yavamo tochiach. The case of Yavamo will disprove your kal v'chomer. How? Because we know Yavamo, when a man has a brother who has no children and that brother died, you have the mitzvah of Yivum. How do you do that mitzvah of Yivum? You have to live with the woman. But kesef won't work. You can't buy the woman. You actually have to live with her. That's the only acquisition that will work. Therefore, since the Yavama is niknas b'biyah, it's coming with biyah, the eno niknas b'kesef, if it's not coming with kesef, the kal v'chomer falls off. Because I proved to you that it's not true. It's not true that just because you have biyah, therefore you also have kesef, because I have a case where it's not true. The Gemara continues and wants to remove the dechia that we had to the kal v'chomer by saying that Yavama is something completely different. Yavama does not have star. And since Yavama does not have star, well, it's not similar to an acquisition of a woman or the acquisition of an amma. And therefore, the fact that Yavama does not have kesef is not a disproof. At that point, the Gemara says, Tama lomer ki yikach ish, and therefore we have the pasuk. So the Gemara says, Halam likra, I just learned from a kal v'chomer. What do you mean now I have a pasuk? We have to explain further, the Gemara says. I have a more essential difficulty with the kal v'chomer. What is that? I didn't bring an outside case of Yavama to prove to me that the kal v'chomer was no good. Internally, I have an internal contradiction between an isha and an amma, the kal v'chomer itself. An isha, we know, has to go out with a get. You have to give her a document to go out. Where an amma, on the other hand, a slave girl, goes out without a get. Goes out even with kesef. So it makes sense that she's acquired through kesef. She goes out with kesef, she's acquired for kesef. But you can't learn from there a kal v'chomer, that since biyah does not work by an amma ivri and kesef does work, so surely kesef will work by an isha, because we know that a woman doesn't go out with kesef. Maybe your kesef only works when you go in through kesef, you can go out through kesef, but an isha requires a get. And therefore you cannot learn the kal v'chomer. And that explains why you have the pasuk, Ki yikach ish isha, because we cannot learn from a kal v'chomer. All the Rishonim now have a kasha on the Gemara, the Ramban, the Rashba, and the Ritva. They all ask, wait a second, what is this kal v'chomer here? What's the havamina to say you had a kal v'chomer? You want to prove to me that the fact that an amma does not have biyah and has kesef, so surely an isha that has biyah that you can live with her, surely kesef should work. That doesn't prove that the kinyan of biyah is gerua, that the kinyan of biyah is less of a kinyan, and I could build a kal v'chomer on it. It just means that biyah is not shaykh by an amma. An amma is not an acquisition of ishus. You're not marrying the amma, you're acquiring her. So how can you say the fact that biyah doesn't work is enough for me to build a kal v'chomer on? In other words, that biyah is less of a kinyan, and kesef is more of a kinyan. If less of a kinyan works, so surely the more of a kinyan will work by isha. It's not true, it just doesn't work because you're not acquiring her as a wife. Because of this tremendous kasha, this difficulty, but the Rishonim have to come in so long and say something very dochik in the Gemara. Lav dafka kal v'chomer, the Rishonim say. Doesn't really mean a kal v'chomer. It even means a mamatzinu. It means even through a dimyon. What's the difference between a kal v'chomer and a mamatzinu? Both of them are syllogisms. One is a syllogism through a dimyon, a comparison, plus more or less. That's a kal v'chomer, because it's working on the more or the less. And the other one is just a simple dimyon. That's what's called a mamatzinu. So come along the Rishonim and say, the Gemara threw out a kal v'chomer, but the basic kasha, the difficulty was really based on a mamatzinu. And even if I would have a pirchet on my kal v'chomer, well, I would still have a problem with the pasuk. Why? Because I can learn from a mamatzinu. What would the mamatzinu be? Just like an ama ivriya is coming through kesef, and the acquisition of an ama ivriya is similar to acquiring a wife, so let them both work through kesef. I mean, you get the ma'aseh yadeya, you get the work of both of them, and there's certain similarities between them, so why can't you learn from one from the other? If an ama ivriya is coming through kesef, so Isha is also coming through kesef, but not a kal v'chomer, not because it's more or less, just because it's comparable. Now this is very dochik in the Gemara, because the Gemara says kal v'chomer. But it's lav dafka kal v'chomer, even if it's a mamatzinu. When we learned there's a kal v'chomer, so the dechiyah would be yavam otochiach. In other words, you see that you have yivum, you do not have kesef, even though you have bia. So I really disproved the kal v'chomer. But now we're not learning a kal v'chomer anymore. We're learning from mamatzinu. So what does it mean yavam otochiach? It means, why are you comparing an isha to a ama where there's no bia? You can acquire an isha through bia, and you can't acquire an ama through bia. Maybe it's better to madami them to compare a isha to a yavama where bia works, but in such a case kesef will not work. And therefore, you have absolutely no raya from svara to say that kesef will work by an isha, because a wife is more comparable to konen, your brother's wife, and not to an ama ivriya. Come along the Rishonim, they have a problem with the end of the Gemara. The Gemara says Yavama doesn't have shtar. So the Ramban and the Rashba and the Ritva all come along and say, wait a second, that move was supposed to bring the kal v'chomer back to life, but it doesn't really do it. Why? Because even if you say it doesn't have a shtar, but still, the bottom line, it has bia and it doesn't have kesef. So that's, therefore, there's no kal v'chomer. You can't prove that kesef is any better than bia. So for those who are holding that the Gemara is learned, but there are kal v'chomer, no, that means that Yavama is completely different, and therefore it's irrelevant. Why is it irrelevant? Because Yavama already has zika. As soon as the brother dies, these two brothers have a relationship already. The bia at the end is just the nigmar din of the Yavama. He's just finishing the thing off. So of course kesef doesn't work, and of course shtar doesn't work. Of course all these things don't work, because it's a totally different type of a kinyan going on here. It's a finish of a kinyan. We're finishing the kinyan. It's out of the box, and therefore it's not a difficulty anymore because it's irrelevant. And according to the ones that learn that it's a mamatzinu, we're learning through a dimyon, well, of course, you don't have any problem with the kal v'chomer, and it's really just saying that it's more comparable to ama. Since we see that Yavama doesn't have a shtar, well, we should say it's more comparable to ama and not comparable to isha, and therefore there's no difficulty.